to the first lecture of the spring lecture series of the Center for Children and Families. We're kind of excited because this is our, well, I'm excited. This is our 10th year, and we've had just great lecture series every year, I think, and this one may surpass the others, and we'll see. I hope you come back to the next lecture, which is next Wednesday night. Not very spaced out this year, but I hope you stay aware of the lectures we have and attend each and every one of them. I will let Dr. Candace Mills introduce our speaker. Dr. Mills is the faculty organizer of the lecture series, and so please, Candace.
Thank you. So thank you all for coming today. Like Margaret said, I'm Candace Mills. I'm a faculty member in the School of Behavioral and Brain Sciences. And Mark and I work together to organize the series each year. We're really excited about this year's series. And our first speaker, Dina Castro. Dr. Castro is from Peru, where she first conducted research and interventions with children living in poverty. She received a number of degrees along the way, leading up to a Ph.D. in early childhood education and special education from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She's been actively involved in research and public service, focusing on promoting positive development and learning in children from low income and from racially, ethnically, culturally, and linguistically diverse families. Dr. Castro is an active researcher and scholar, publishing in prestigious journals and having earned nearly $15 million in grant support from agencies such as the Institute of Education Science, the National Institute of Child Health and Development, and the Administration for Children and Families to support her research. Dr. Castro's research examines some really important questions regarding how we educate dual language learners. So much discussion in developmental science focuses on thinking about people in terms of flaws and weaknesses and how they are compared to monolingual English speakers who are middle to upper class, right? And so this can be a serious problem if we think about people only in terms of flaws and how they compare to this other group. It's not thinking about what they bring to the table, what their characteristics are, what their needs are. And so Dr. Castro approaches thinking about these problems from that perspective, thinking about what they, at least as I understand, what people bring to their table, what their own needs are, and less about it being about flaws and more about what do they need, what can we do to help them succeed. And I think she's going to be talking about some of this work today. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Dina Castro.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me well? Yes? Is this working? Well, let's hope that technology helps and we have a good conversation today. Thank you very much, Candice, for the nice introduction that can feel a little overwhelming sometimes. It's a lot of work. But I'm very happy to be here with all of you today and to have the opportunity to share some of the work that I've done related to the early education of dual language learners in the United States. As it was mentioned before, I'm from Peru, and I've lived in, I see there are some Peruvians in the audience. Yes? Good. That's not common, actually, when I present. So my work began back in Peru, and my interest in issues of early childhood education also began when I was working in Peru. My first research studies were related to how children who were coming from a Quechua-speaking background. So in Peru, you know, Quechua is the language of the Incas. It's one of the largest indigenous languages in Peru. And they were children of migrants in Lima, the capital city, going to schools that were only in Spanish, where instruction was in Spanish. The curriculum was not really including issues related to the history or the experiences of these children beyond, besides the historical part. But we know that culture is alive and present and children are living it every day, right? So we want them to see that throughout the curriculum and throughout their experiences in school as well. So that was the situation there. Children were being derived or referred to special education. I'm a psychologist. That's my first career. And so I was being, looking in my office. Children were referred to my office for suspicion of delays or disabilities. because of the language problem. So then I moved to the United States, and I began, my experience here, going to Head Start programs where the Latino population was growing, and again, programs that were early childhood programs that were being offered only in English, families that could not connect with schools because they didn't have enough English skills, children who were not seeing themselves or their families in the curriculum or in the activities were not culturally relevant for them. So the same story repeated again. Don't you think some resemblance in these two experiences? That was, so my experience in Peru, and then I found the similar kind of patterns that happened when children are coming from a background that is not the majority background, basically, right? So that's in a nutshell what had been the focus of my work, continues being my concern after 30 plus years in this field. Because there is still a lot of work to do. So I will stop there with the background information. Now you know a little bit more about myself and my motivations. And the last piece to this motivation is that when I moved to the United States in 1991, I had a 4-year-old son. So then I became part of that minority group with a child that was going to school in an English-only setting. Well, what can I tell you? So it became also part of my personal experience as well, not only an interest, for, not an academic interest, not only a social justice issue that it still is for me, but also a personal investment. So for all those reasons, I'm here with you today, and I'm going to begin my presentation, talking about the development of dual language learners, something that, let me see if this works. Perfect. The context here in the United States. Why is this topic important? Definitely, we are all aware of the changes in the demographics of the country, right? I think there's not discussion about that. So there are more and more diversity in the society, in the United States society. So we all need to be prepared, those of us working in the early childhood care and education field in particular, being prepared to address the needs and the characteristics of children and families. The school readiness gap, unfortunately, there is still a school readiness gap, not even beginning to talk about the achievement gap. There is a school readiness gap, which is really sad and unacceptable, but it exists, and it affects children from low-income backgrounds who in the United States, majority of whom in the United States come from minority ethnic and racial groups. Increased accountability requirements are making things good, better, and worse at the same time. Why do I say that? Because we do want programs to be accountable and professionals to be accountable for providing high quality early care and education to young children. But the challenges are when those accountability systems are based on a perspective that focuses only on monolingual mainstream children. So that's when we find the mismatches. Early education programs are not designed for meet the needs of diverse children. I don't want to be that negative. Progress is being made, right? Progress is being made, but we're still not there. I think that there's still, challenges with finding programs or curriculums, for example, that are being translated into Spanish. That is progress. But then the challenge is that may not be culturally relevant. So that's what I mean when I think that the early and the definition of childhood and how we see children's development still is predominantly coming from a view of this mainstream majority cultural child. The educational success of these children, all of our children, and the children coming from diverse backgrounds in particular, is essential for the progress of the educational system and the economic future of the children. Right now, at least a quarter of the young children are coming from diverse backgrounds nationally. Think about Texas. I think those percentages are even larger for the state of Texas, right? So it's definitely important for us to do our best in providing these children with the highest, quality early education, care and education services. As I said, we are becoming more diverse than ever, and that is going into the future. There is no way back. That sometimes people think that, no, these people are gonna leave. Nobody's gonna leave. We are staying here. And our young children are born in this country. They are staying here and they're gonna grow up and have their families. So there is no way back. Important, the diversity within the DLS population. Dual language learners are diverse. There is no one homogeneous group, and sometimes we tend to dichotomize. Is the DLLs versus the non-DLLs. Like if this is just one group. Well, no, it's not that easy. Children are coming from different countries of origin, even within the Spanish-speaking DLLs. We come from over 20 Spanish-speaking countries in the world. So culture-wise, we may speak the same language, and sometimes even communicating in the same language is difficult, or it can be challenging because it's not the same, the Spanish from Colombia or the Spanish from Mexico versus the Spanish that we speak in Peru. There are words that might be different, and let me tell you, sometimes I try to keep up with the conversation with my colleagues from other countries, and we have to, okay, what do you mean exactly, So it is, even within the Spanish-speaking population, we are not all the same. There is a difference, of course, that the immigrant versus non-immigrant experience make. There are large numbers in particular. I'm referring to Texas again. We have, talking about the Spanish-speaking or Latino population, people have been here for generations. Some were immigrants, some have been here before the war, so the border crossed over them, right? They never really migrated. So there's a range of experiences right there. Proficiencies in English and in non-English language there's a range of proficiencies. And I want to refer right now to when we use the term home language, right? That's common. We talked about we support the home language or not support the local, but we use the term home language. So really the term, if you think about it, when we think about home language, I would say home language or home languages, right? So there is no one home language. Another misconception. Because households may have people that speak English with different levels of proficiency and their first other language, and also with different levels of proficiency, and they are all in the same household. So that is an important factor for diversity. And finally, socioeconomic status and parental education also vary largely among these groups. This is a graphic just to show you a little bit what I'm saying. We analyzed the early childhood longitudinal survey birth cohort. This is a national sample of dual language learners. And we analyzed it by country of origin. So I wanted to show you this because you can see how this illustrates the diversity that I'm talking about, at least from the linguistic place. So depending on the different countries, there are different levels of, their characteristics in the households with regard to speaking only one language or being bilingual. Okay, so some considerations when we think about early kindergarten education of young dual language learners. What is important? And to me is one of the crucial things is thinking about developmental characteristics of dual language learners. it is not only about learning English. These children are whole human beings, and they develop, so there are different aspects of their lives that are, related to their bilingual condition. And I'm going to elaborate more on that. The sociocultural context, there is diversity in the experiences of these children. So those are also going to influence their developmental characteristics. And finally, early education not designed to address the needs of dual language learners, which means that children are affected by the fact that the early education care and education services they received did not match their needs, right? So these are basically some, I'm going to elaborate on all of these three aspects today. We need to move away from these approaches that think about children, dual language learners using monolingual norms. So I think we are all in the audience, you work in assessing children, right, young children. And we work hard and try to be culturally appropriate and linguistically appropriate, so we'll look for instruments, assessment instruments that are available in languages other than English. And those exist. But we still are facing the challenges that those instruments have not been normed on a DLL bilingual population. And some of them have been normed in monolingual languages, like, for example, Spanish, talking about Spanish. There are instruments that have been normed in Spanish-speaking countries, but not in bilingual populations in the United States, which of course, we have different contexts, specific contexts here. So that's a challenge. We tend to think about bilingual children as two monolinguals in one. And when you have that perspective, then that justifies the fact that we propose models of care in education that address the two languages separately. Like saying, for example, today we have the English day, so all day we talk, even in bilingual design programs. Today we talked about, today is the English day, tomorrow we talked about in Spanish. Do you think that we could shut down half of your brain for a whole day? Right? That's what we're asking children. So we think that we can do this one language one day with this two other language in another day. I don't think that's how the brain of bilinguals work. And then bilingualism affects all developmental domains, not just language. Not just language. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What about cognitive development of young dual language learners? We conducted a review, had the fortune to work with Dr. Ellen Bialystok and her colleagues from Canada, and we conducted a review of the literature on the cognitive development of young children. So I'm just sharing with you a couple of points that support the conversation today. The experience of with two languages, no matter how short, changes the way language is organized in the brain. So it's again, to make my point that developmentally, bilinguals are different than monolinguals. The brain is wired in a different way. Okay? Typically developing bilingual children show more advanced skills than their monolingual peers in nonverbal executive control skills. That is also something that has been supported by research. So basically, the point here is there are advantages. There was research showing advantages, but I think we're getting more in depth into in which areas specifically those advantages are showing. That is important. Language and literacy development. As I said, I'm just sharing with you a few findings so that just to communicate this idea of how dual language learners or bilinguals are developmentally different. Consensus, I think there is consensus now of the bilingual children have two separate and connected, that's the key word, language systems. Yes, we can go back and forth, but those two systems are connected, and we learn through the two languages, not just one, right? You're using the two, your brain is using and connecting to the world through two languages all the time. There's transferability in between these two languages. That is also another reason why it is important to address the care and education of the children using two languages, their two languages. Dual language learners often lag behind monolingual children in their single language proficiency. Do you think that makes sense? Sure. You're using two languages, so you have two repertoires of vocabulary. So that's the next point is related to that. Conceptual vocabularies, when you put together the sets of vocabularies that a bilingual child has in each of the two languages, is usually similar in size or larger than the vocabulary of a monolingual. So there's no reason to think that they are behind. If you looked at the two languages separately, they said, well, we are assessing the child, and I had these conversations with colleagues before. I said, Dina, why, if the children are going to perform, or obtain a low score in each of the languages, why do we have to assess them? We know that they have low vocabularies anyway. That is not right. That is not the right reasoning here. So we need to put together everything a child knows using the two languages because that's the way they learn. Socio-emotional development, also another aspect that is influenced by their bilingual conditions, right? Dual language self-regulation is one of those areas. So dual language learners show higher levels of self-control in their English than their English monolingual peers in kindergarten entry and continue to achieve higher levels through 5th grade. Why do you think is that? That is related with something here. They have more control because we have to be switching tasks, right, when you're a bilingual person. So self-control is one of the areas in which bilinguals have advantages. Problem behavior, and that is being supported in several studies that bilingual children or dual language learners show slower growth of problem behaviors from kindergarten through 5th grade. Okay.
I didn't understand that. Slower growth.
Well, slower growth. I just want to say was show less. Actually, what I wanted to mention here is about internalizing and externalizing behaviors. I decided to put problem behavior to make it easier, but that's what happens, right? So they have lower scores on internalizing and externalizing behaviors than monolinguals. So that is what I wanted to share with you about. I hope I communicated the idea about how developmentally are different or may be dual language learners, or in which aspects, in which ways they are different. So let's talk now about the context of development for dual language learners in the United States. We all here involved in the developmental science area know the role of context and environment on children's development. So in this case, we're talking about dual language learners. So why that would be different? So what we need is to think about, again, in which ways the context of life in which these children are growing up can impact their development. And sometimes we don't think about it that way. Societal context. I love this picture. These are our children, right? The children we have to take care of. Negative stereotypes. There are negative stereotypes in society. We don't think that young children can perceive that, but they do. And if their parents are living and experiencing discrimination, there's tension, there's depression, there's all of this negative context that develops surrounding these young children. There's no way that's not gonna affect them. So that is important to take into account. There's a generational shift, language shift. Why do you think that happens? Well, I'm just putting it here, right? There's language loss happening because, again, of societal influences that make children to feel ashamed of who they are and their family's language and background. Sometimes the parents decide that the children are not going to be speaking their family language because they don't want their children to go through the negative experiences of discrimination that they have to go through, right? So, and sometimes the children decide not to maintain their first language because of the same reasons. And I want to share with you an experience something that a teacher shared with me. And because we were talking about the importance of addressing issues of diversity with young children. And then some teachers were saying, well, they're too young. Why are we going to be talking to them about these things? It's too hard for them to understand. And then another teacher then said, yes, I think we should. And she shared this story or this experience. It said, I had the children in my classroom, I'm talking about 4-year-old classroom, that they were working in small groups, and every day they rotated the children rotated different tables. Till one day when this boy comes to the teacher and said, I cannot sit there, the place that seat that he had assigned for that day. And the teacher asked, but why? You know that we do that. We are all friends. We just, share with each other, whoever is in the classroom. And the child said, no, because I cannot sit with, and he used the N word. That's a little sad. It's really, really sad, not a little, a lot. So we do have to, try to work with children, and we need to avoid these negative consequences on young children. 4-year-olds already have formed their prejudice and their, negative ideas about other people who are different from them at a very young age. They learn it from home. Okay, let's continue. This is an important. So moving from vulnerabilities to assets. There's too much around in our own work, in practice, in policy development, and in the way we conduct research that focuses on the vulnerabilities. I'm not saying these children do not have vulnerabilities. Yes, they are affected by a number of factors in their lives that make them vulnerable. But they also are assets. So we need to balance it out. Let me give you a few pieces of information here that are related to those assets. For example, and we not talked about a lot about this, you know that among the bilingual population or dual language learners, the infant mortality rates are lower than that of other groups? For some of them, not all of them, but for some of them. Particular Mexican immigrant families have lower infant mortality rates than even the mainstream population, the majority population. They have fewer physical and mental health problems. Dual language learners tend to live in two-parent families with a strong work ethic. Parents have high education aspirations for their children. They are interested in their children's education. Otherwise, they would have not gone through all the trouble they had to go through to find a place where the children can be successful. Don't you think? Families support early childhood education experiences for their children. And I'm going to share with you some data about that as well. So all of these are assets that we should take into consideration when we're thinking about interventions and programs for this population. They do have something to bring to the table. Community context also influence children's experiences. So environments in which they're exposed, and there's more and more we all are involved in multiple languages, having multiple languages around us. The presence and value of different language in the community will generate the conditions for bilingualism and biliteracy. So that is important. I mentioned if the children find that their being bilingual or multilingual is valued, they're going to feel comfortable and continue supporting that for their own lives. And the families will feel more comfortable also supporting. It's not enough to say, oh, I am completely, I completely agree and support that you speak your home language with your children. At home, but not here. What the message is. So we're just putting it aside. Oh, wonderful, but that's your business, not ours. And we want that to be our business for everybody. So we tend to think words have power. And I think we do things sometimes without the intention, of course, of harming, but we are causing harm. Because we don't think about the long-term consequences, for example, of children losing their first language. Okay, let me continue. Family context, we all know that that is important, but we have to be tuned in to each family's beliefs, ideas, parenting practices. It is important, and not all families are made the same. Again, I'm just mentioning a few here that are related to the Latino population and the Chinese population. But my point is language and literacy practices are influenced by family members. We talked about family members having different language proficiencies, language preferences, and language beliefs. So I remember, let me tell you another little anecdote here. I was in an early childhood classroom once and to conduct an observation, and the teacher, an English-speaking monolingual teacher, she asked me, oh, Dina, wonderful. I'm so glad that you're here today because we're having trouble with this kid. And I don't know Spanish, so I hope you can help me find out what is going on with him. And I said, sure, no problem. Could you tell me which country this child is? And she looked at me and said, oh, I don't know. I think Guatemala, but he speaks Spanish. And I said, okay. An early childhood teacher cannot afford to do that. We need to know the kids. We need to know where these children are coming. Show more interest, you know? Well, anyway, I think you are getting the point. Early care and education context. That's our territory, right? This is information from a study that we conducted again, looking at these large national data sets. We found out that dual language learners show larger gains than other children when they were in high quality center-based care that used their first language in the setting. I'm not talking about a specific type of bilingual, two-way, one-way. We just wanted to know if the data that we gathered was if the home language was being used. So that was an important piece of information. So the evidence suggests that they're more likely to be in parental or relative care before pre-K, be enrolled in center-based care by pre-K, and in general, they experience lower high-quality care. So these are, I think, important. Let me show you this information in this graphic. And you can see how, when they are when they're 9 months, 24 months, and 52. So relative care in between dual language learners and English-only children decreases as, when they are in center. We looked into this last, the 3 columns related to center care. You see how, center care at 52-month-old is about the same for both dual language learners and non-dual language learners. So, and this is important, I think, because we tend to think that the families of dual language learners do not enroll their young children in early care and education programs, and center-based don't tend not to. Well, there is a difference. It depends at which age. But it's very clear here that the families of dual language learners are concerned about their children's pre-kindergarten, so getting ready for school. And it's the concept of the escuelita, I think that is very clear. So the children need to go to la escuelita to be prepared for school. So there is that notion. So I think we need to, again, to kind of avoid some myth that we have about Latino families and in general dual language learner families not being interested in center-based care, right? When you start digging deeper in really trying to understand what that was about, this is what we found. So now we have a better idea. So we also found that related to bilingual care, access to bilingual care, of course, as the children were being enrolled in center-based, look what happened with their access, if that makes sense. Because when they're younger, they're staying with their relatives, so they have more access to the bilingual care or care in their first language. As they grow older and are enrolled in center-based care, that changes, right? And goes down. And ideally, we would like to see that being more steady, right? But this shows that our young children are not having access to bilingual care as they would need. I don't know how I'm doing in time. Would someone help me? Okay. I think this is another point that I thought is important for us to have in mind. Every child benefits from high quality early education, including dual language learners. There's no doubt about it. However, dual language learners will need additional or different type of practices that will meet their specific needs. So I think this is also very important. And I'm not talking more only. Is sometimes we have to modify it. That's why I say different practices, different ways of addressing, or conducting the early childhood education activities. Talking about high quality early education for dual language learners. I hope I'm not going too fast. I'm going to speed up a little bit to cover all the topics that I have here to talk with you today. But specifically, I know there are other elements related to high quality early education, but today I just want to focus on those three. Program characteristics, what educators need to know, and then curriculum and instruction. Let's go. See is this. A program that offers high quality early education to dual language learners has policies that support first and second language development, not English acquisition only. For that reason, they should hire bilingual and bicultural staff. The teachers who are qualified to work with bilingual bicultural children. Why do I say this separately? Because I've also been told by program directors or administrators that, Dina, we don't need any training, anything, because we have a bilingual person in each of our classrooms. And you say, okay, wonderful, but is this person an early childhood educator? Right? So so these two things have to go together. Offers ongoing professional development and technical assistance. All teachers need it, but in particular, focusing on how to work with dual language learners. And also using outreach and communication strategies that take into account families' diverse cultures and languages. Sending flyers written in the family's language is not enough as an outreach strategy. Some families will respond much better if you make a phone call, right? So we say, no, all our documents are translated in 3-4 languages. So how do you know that that's the best way to reach out to those families? So strategies need to be culturally relevant and appropriate as well. Educators' knowledge. What is that early educators need to know? And then, I identify them more, I consider more crucial points here. Know about the structural aspects of language development. I know that early educators are not speech pathologists. However, there's basic knowledge that they need to understand how young children develop language in all the different aspects: grammar, vocabulary acquisition, sounds, development of the sounds. And because the first step is the first stop, right, to refer a child for special ed or early intervention is the classroom. If the teachers are not knowledgeable about what is typical development for a child who is bilingual, these children are going to end up in the special ed. So they need to have a notion of that. It's very important. The development of both first and second language. The relation between language and culture. That is also in how all those things how our aspects are related to all the developmental domains of children. Because again, we tend to see you have a dual language learner coming to the classroom and all the work focusing on having this child learning English as soon as possible. Like if that's the only answer. And then when we do not pay attention to the other aspects of their development, we think, it has developmental delays, right? So that's why they need to be more aware of that. Knowing about effective instructional practices to promote development and learning of dual language learners. And finally, I mentioned the issues with assessment. Oh, let me see. Oh, where is Diego? He used to be here. Let me see. Okay, do teachers need to know a little bit of the language of the children or not? For those Spanish speakers in the audience, how do you spell Diego? Diego is a diphthong in Spanish. It's not Diego. And Diego knew it. Right? The teacher was wrong. But then what happened? What's the consequence? Diego was feeling ashamed and didn't understand what is wrong. So you know what I mean? That was self-deprived. So I think we're running out of time. I'm sorry. But maybe I can do the rest, a little quicker. Curriculum and instruction. Use strategies that are targeting the characteristics of dual language learners and how to incorporate elements of children's culture, not just having one multicultural fair a year. Include language and communication styles that are familiar to the children. And use language and culture as resources for learning. It seems common sense, but it's unfortunate that it doesn't happen as often as we would like to see it in classrooms, right? So what do all this mean for early education? High quality early care and education environments should take into account the unique features of these children. The early care and education program needs to support the two languages. Approaches to address the needs can vary. So there are different approaches. We can talk about that in another day. That's another whole issue. And use assessments of development and academic performance should be conducted always in two languages, not only until children are proficient in English. I want to spend a couple minutes talking about the Nuestros Niños Readiness Program. This is a professional development intervention that, because of all of these concerns, my colleagues and I in North Carolina developed, at UNC Chapel Hill developed this program. And we obtained funding to conduct experimental study to be able to put it into practice and see and assess the efficacy of this intervention with teachers, and that's important, with teachers in English-only classrooms. Why I focused on those classrooms? Because those are the classrooms where the teachers need this help. Not in the classrooms where we have bilingual teachers with bilingual certificates. But I think there are more classrooms around the country, early childhood classrooms around the country, where teachers do not have a clue of how to work with bilingual children. Right? So that's why we created this program. This is these are the content areas that we included in the training. So teachers participated in institutes. There were 3 days in the first year before beginning the intervention, the work, and then 2 days at the beginning of the second year. So they were with us for 2 years. Consultations happened. So there was a bilingual consultant that worked with the teachers and visited the teachers every other week throughout the year, the years. And then in the weeks in between, we have professional learning communities. So each of the bilingual consultants work with at least 5, sometimes 5, 6 teachers. So they got together in professional learning communities every other week as well, so that teachers developed together the lesson plans to apply all the strategies, the work that we were doing with them, to apply those strategies in their classrooms, and then got together and they were giving feedback to each other. So this is more or less what happened. So just want to share, this is another video. This is a read aloud, and I want to show you because this is part of what the intervention was about. So the teachers in the read aloud, again, putting the emphasis on using both languages. We were concerned first about providing children access to the content of the book, The book was worked throughout the week in different ways. But first, children were read the story in Spanish, and then on another day, they were read the story in English. So I'm going to show you the English monolingual teacher reading the book after the children have been read the story in Spanish. What happened here, and then you'll see the props already being distributed, that the teachers have chosen a book. They chose the 3 words that were going to be the focus of the reading, and then those 3 words were addressed in different ways throughout the classroom. So there were classroom extensions of the book, of the topic of the book for the week. And so the teacher ends up reading, the children are involved. She uses the visuals, right, the props with the language. And then, she acts out the story, uses all her dialogical reading skills, but all the time focusing on making the content comprehensible for all children. So that is, I think, the basics of that, the way. But let me see if I can do this. I don't know. Okay, well, let me. So I just, as a way of my conclusions today, because I think we're over the time already. So the dual language learning population, I'm just summarizing the talk today, is not a homogeneous group. The school readiness gap for dual language learners is more likely to be related to poverty than to the fact that children are bilingual. I would say even that if we support bilingualism in these children, that can act as a protective factor for them and actually help them instead of harming them. So if we take away the possibility for these kids to be bilingual, we are hurting children because we're taking away something that will help them do better in school, right? So, and I think if we think about these children as at risk, let's think about their at risk of not having access to a high quality early education. There is no blame on the child. The problem is not the child, the problem is the education system. Young children have the capacity to learn more than one language, and this does not confuse them. How many of you who have been around bilingual children will see them going back and forth in their languages? They are the translators for their parents, and so there's no confusion. They are perfectly able to become bilingual. So bilingualism is not inherent, has not inherent negative consequences for children's development. To the contrary, it is beneficial. And something also important is that strong skills in their first language is going to facilitate the acquisition of a second language or a third language, right? So if we're taking away, think about children that are learning language in general from the day they're born. Some scientists think that even before they are already learning language, right? The prenatal. So they are in the process of developing that language, and then we stop that and try to add another language from scratch. So we're interrupting a development of the first language that is, instead of helping them continuing developing the language and adding another one. The use of the first language by the family can be a protective factor for dual language learners from immigrant families. And we have found that children of immigrant mothers actually that are bilingual do better than monolingual speakers. But they have to have access to those. So fully bilingual children can benefit, not just halfway bilingual. So the stronger their bilingualism, the better. Well, these are just some references for you to have. And I want to end with this. I hope this one works. It's just one more minute of your attention. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
We have time for a couple of questions from the audience.
Yes.
I noticed the teachers switching back and forth between English and Spanish. I was taught years ago that you weren't supposed to do that.
No,
Is
no, no,
that
the teacher was
longer-
not switching. Oh, at the beginning, you mean
No,
with the
in
words?
video, when she was talking about la cucaracha and the cockroach.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between that and language switching between saying,
Yes, no, I think, well, I didn't have time to show the whole video because it's about 7 minutes. But she was only making the connection with the reading from the first day to showing the children and repeating the vocabulary words only in the two languages at the beginning. And then she continues reading the book only in English. No. Going back and forth, no. That's not the way to do it. So she read the whole book in English, and at the end, she comes back to the vocabulary words only in English. So that was the English reading day. Yes. Thank you for your question, because if that was something that was perceived, that was not my intention. No. Yeah. Yes, another question? Yes.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was really fantastic. I have a question on, it's kind of like a small and large scale, about talking with families and children about the negative stereotypes that they feel, because working with families, I often find that they just want to speak English. Do you have a suggestion on how to speak to families and children about wanting to keep their first language?
Well, I think our role should be to communicate to families this research. I mean, of course, using the appropriate language and in ways, but that is so assuring them that the children are going to be better off if they maintain their two languages, that is going to help them do better in school, because that's the misconception the parents have. They are concerned that their children are not going to be learning English, and that there is no way the children are not going to be learning English in a monolingual English-speaking country. So they are. So we are working towards the goal of making, bilingualism and multilingualism more of the norm than something special that we have to deal with as a special thing, right? So to answer your comment or question, I think we need to communicate the parents, and I think also our position as professionals, help a little bit with that. If they see this coming from the school, from the professionals that are taking care of their kids, they're going to follow, probably trust that you are providing the right information, right? It is hard for us to counter the influences of society, but if we can do something to assure the parents and that they shouldn't be afraid, that, kind of addressing all their concerns that way, probably that will help. And of course, including them. If the families feel welcome in our programs, if the families see themselves and their culture and their, and people in the program that are welcome and that make them feel comfortable and valued, we need to start somewhere. In changing the way in which the early childhood programs or early childhood services are provided is one of the first steps. Yes.
We have time for one more question.
Yes.
This is great. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us.
Mm-hmm.
The Nuestros Niños Program, in your work, have you been able to implement that program in parts outside of North Carolina?
Yes.
That's kind of weird.
Yeah, we conducted a study in California and Florida as well.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I'm ready to do it in Texas.
Thank you one more time.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a few quick announcements. First, there are 3 handouts related to this this talk available on the CCF website, so you can dig through the CCF website to our lecture series and find out more. Second, as Dr. Owen mentioned, we have a few different talks coming up the rest of the semester for our lecture series. There's one coming up next week on March 28th that's in partnership with the Center for Values in Medicine, Science, and Technology. It is by Dr. Sandra Russ from Case Western Reserve University on pretend play and the development of creativity and imagination. There's also a lecture on April 13th by Dr. Andrea Warner-Sizz on supporting the well-being of pediatric cochlear implant users. And then a talk on April 18th as well in partnership with the Center for Values in Medicine, Science, and Technology. And then the last reminder was that you received a feedback form on your way in. If you could fill that out, your feedback is helpful in supporting us in moving forward with this lecture series in the future. So fill that out, and then on your way out, you can put it on the table. It would be greatly appreciated. Thank you all for coming. If you have any additional questions, you can come up and talk to our speaker on your way out. Thank you.